Hi guys, I'm Erica. Welcome to Hack Your Health. In today's video, I'm going to be answering some questions that I got in a comment on my YouTube channel, obviously. And basically, this is more about what kinds of foods I used or excluded. So I'm just going to read the questions and then answer them the best I can. And just keep in mind that I did this diet. I finished it about 6 years ago now. 5 or 6 years ago, so my specific everyday memory might not be as clear as if this had been more recent, but I'm gonna do my best to answer these with as much detail as I can. So the first question is basically whether I use some kind of food phasing chart to reintroduce foods, and the answer to that is no. Even though it wasn't that long ago, there were a lot less websites and a lot less resources than there are now. So I was basically using the book and my own judgment, as well as I read things such as the Nourishing Traditions Cookbook, and basically I had the mindset of trying to eat foods that were the most similar to what would have been eaten by our human ancestors. And I also started to avoid anything that was genetically modified and heavily sprayed with pesticides, because I got the impression that my body was very sensitive to those foods. So I was using information from a lot of different sources, but I was not following any specific guide. I was only following what made sense to me and what seemed reasonable, and the Specific Carbohydrate Diet itself. So I'll just read out the next question, which is, I know that it depends on the individual's healing process how soon they should introduce foods that are considered more advanced, but it would be nice to hear what you did, since there are not many guidelines for approximately how long you should wait to introduce different foods, neither in the Breaking the Vicious Cycle book, nor at some sites I browsed. So in my case, I basically included all of the foods that are Specific Carbohydrate Diet friendly almost from day one. So I actually didn't even do the intro diet, and I think that it really has to do a lot with how severe your symptoms are when you start the diet. Because if you have really, really severe symptoms, then I would say, it's probably a very good idea to do the intro diet. Like, it's in the book and used for a reason. But I had recently been on medication until about a week prior to starting the diet. And then I switched medications, had a very bad allergic reaction, and didn't really have many options. So I did the Specific Carbohydrate Diet. So when I started the diet, I was not on medication, but I think that being on it so recently had an effect on what kind of state I was in when I started it. So I wasn't in a severe flare, is what I'm trying to get at here. And I also really didn't want to put too many rules on myself, because I had a history of being really obsessive about eating always healthy, and it really didn't go well for me. What I did instead was I kept a food journal for the first 30 days, and I kept track of which Specific Carbohydrate Diet friendly foods were still causing me problems. And I found that nightshades, for example, especially tomatoes, were really bad. So I excluded tomatoes for the first few months. And I'm pretty sure that I also didn't really eat peanut butter, because I didn't like the way I felt when I ate peanut butter. And there were a few other things, such as certain kinds of cheeses, which I'll get to later, that I found I couldn't tolerate. So I excluded those foods, but I didn't exclude them because of any kind of online guide. I excluded them because of the way that they made me feel. So I would suggest keeping a food journal for the first month, because you can read and read and read and read and read. But really, I think it's more helpful to get in tune with your own body and how it's responding to things. Since it isn't the same for every person, I think that there's no particular guide that's going to tell you everything that you need to know, and that you really just need to be very mindful of how the food is affecting you as an individual. Even though it requires quite a bit of effort, I feel like in the long run, it's really not that big of a deal. And even with your cell phone, you always have your cell phone. You can literally download a journaling app or a calendar app or whatever you think is the most relevant. And every time you eat something, just write it down on your phone. And then also, whatever those symptoms are that you personally notice, could be in your joints or whatever else, keep track of those on your phone, as well as what you've eaten. And I think that that's the best guide that you can use for whether or not you're ready to introduce certain foods. How many weeks into the diet did you start adding fats and oils? Several sources say that they are harder to digest, and because of that, we should ease on them at the beginning to help the gut heal faster. So this is something that I personally don't understand, because to me, especially if you've been losing a lot of weight prior to starting the diet and not being able to digest foods, I personally prioritized getting enough calories into my body because I was in a situation where I had lost a lot of weight. So I guess that my response to this would be, if you're eliminating most carbohydrates and you're eliminating fat, what is it that you're going to be eating? So that's why this doesn't necessarily make sense in my mind. If you do have trouble with fat, then I suppose that eating more vegetables that are allowed on the specific carbohydrate diet, for example, might be a solution. But since that wasn't my experience, I can't really give advice to what a person would do who was trying to reduce the number of calories they're getting from fat as well. My goal was actually to increase the amount of fat that I was eating right from the beginning of the diet, especially saturated fat. Like I would add butter, for example, to a lot of things, and I never had a problem with that. Also, I had been restricting fat for a long time, thinking that it was unhealthy, and so I was probably deficient in a lot of fat-soluble vitamins. This is something that if people have more specific questions about, I'd be really happy to hear them and do more research into that, because it's really something that I've never understood, is what are you supposed to eat for one thing if you're also eliminating fat? And since fat is a stable source, it doesn't feed those harmful bacteria the way that sugar or carbohydrates do. I felt like fat was like the safest thing for me to eat, and my whole goal is to increase it. Of course, I don't know what those sources are, and I didn't read it myself, but I have come across this idea before, and my personal take on it is that it doesn't make sense, but I don't know exactly the reasoning behind it. So if you have more information on that, I'd be really happy to hear it. How many weeks or months did you wait to start introducing nut butters and whole nuts? And did you introduce some nuts before others? So I do remember that I used to buy little packs of cashews on a regular basis. It was like $2 for a little bag of cashews. And that was something that if I was hungry and I was out at school, for example, I could grab that as a snack. So I definitely did eat quite a few cashews. I never used almond flour or ate that many. I did eat hemp seeds, which I did not know were not SCD friendly until someone commented it. Nuts were not a big part of my diet. Besides, I did fairly regularly, like every few days probably, eat a small amount of cashews, but I didn't eat nut butters at all regularly, if ever. I may have eaten peanut butter occasionally, but I also didn't eat much of that. Hopefully that's helpful to you. I didn't specifically eliminate them, but I also didn't rely heavily on them either. How long did you exclusively puree cooked vegetables and fruits, and when did you progress to eating them chopped in bigger pieces? I never exclusively pureed vegetables or fruits. So right from the very first day of the diet, I was using chopped vegetables for cooking. I didn't have anything to puree fruits or vegetables with, for one thing. And I found that cutting them up and cooking them was good enough for me. Of course, this is another thing that is probably going to vary based on individuals and what state they're in when they start the diet, etc. But for me, it was never necessary to do that. Did you eat vegetables and fruit only cooked the whole time during the diet, or did you at some point start eating them raw as well? And if so, after how many months did you start eating them raw, such as having a raw salad with every meal? So at first, I would eat fruits, with the exception of berries, cooked, and I didn't eat very many fruit. And then probably about 6 months or so in, I was eating them more raw, like especially if they were cut up and put on top of something, I would eat them raw more often. So for fruits, yeah, I was cooking them, especially at the beginning, except the berries that I was picking. For vegetables, to be honest, don't really remember. I know that I was cooking the vast majority of the vegetables, but I do think that I was still eating some raw. I would say this is another instance where the food journal would come in really handy, because raw vegetables are harder to digest and are irritating to a lot of people. And they were irritating to me, especially things like cabbage and stuff like that raw. But to be honest, I don't really remember how often I was eating raw vegetables. I just know that I was eating mostly cooked vegetables. And since it's going to come down to individual tolerances anyways, I would recommend using the food journal to figure that one out. And don't take anything that I say as like the word of God or anything. Experiment. And if anything that I'm saying doesn't make sense to you, feel free to completely disregard it. I'm just telling you my own personal thoughts and experiences, which might not be relevant to every person. After how many weeks or months did you introduce sauerkraut and kefir? I introduced these at the very beginning, like day 1, and I found that these were the most impactful foods. The sauerkraut and the kefir made me feel so much better. And of course, I realized that kefir isn't technically legal and yogurt is. So yogurt, kefir, whatever you want to use, I feel like repopulating your digestive tract with some kind of helpful bacteria is really important. And fermented foods are a great way to do that. I also drank kombucha. I made it myself, and it ferments the sugar, but you do put sugar in it, and I don't even know if that's SCD legal or not, but I was trying to include the most probiotic foods that I could, and I also used miso paste, and I ate some kimchi, but not as much, because that's not really part of my diet. It's a Korean food, so I ate it sometimes, but I more ate sauerkraut. Yeah, I was trying to eat something probiotic definitely every day, and my real goal was to eat something probiotic with every meal. So I was often eating probiotic foods twice a day. So for example, kefir in the morning and sauerkraut with dinner. And I know that some people can tolerate them better than others, but in my case, they were very, very helpful. After how much time did you introduce cheeses? I never excluded cheeses. I excluded foods with modified milk products and any kind of processed cheeses and things that aren't really fermented. So the next question is also about cheese. So you mentioned in the video that you can tolerate only European type of cheeses and not block cheddar type cheeses. Can you tell me what you meant by European type of cheeses? Are those hard, semi-hard, or soft? And what are their names? Also, how many grams of carbohydrates and sugar does their packaging say they have per 100 grams? When I say European style cheeses, in my mind, that means cheeses that are used or that are made using an aging and fermenting process. And often European brands and European styles of cheese are actually aged, whereas American and to some extent Canadian types of cheese are often just made from modified milk ingredients, which is often like whey protein or some extract of milk, mixed together and not really properly aged. So they're not very high quality, and I wouldn't say that they're real cheese. So I was differentiating more between the kind of processing. You can buy blocks of cheddar cheese at the store, and that I don't think is really aged and fermented in the same way that something like a good quality Parmesan cheese or even a good quality local brand of cheddar cheese or other things like that. So I don't know how many grams of sugar would be in those or anything else. I would just recommend thinking about what kind of processing is going into the cheese, whether it's actually being fermented or not. And if it's not being fermented, those are the ones that I'm talking about that I couldn't tolerate. The answer to this last part of the question is I don't know. How long did you wait to start introducing legumes? I don't know if I ever completely eliminated them 100% or not. I, for the most part, didn't eat legumes. I don't remember exactly how often I ate them, but they were in no way a fundamental part of my diet. Like, I didn't buy them and prepare them. I probably had them a few times out, maybe, but I don't think I ever really included them in any significant way, and I still don't. Elaine Gottschall said in her book that bean sprouts are not allowed. Do you know, did she mean that it isn't allowed to have any type of beans or lentils to slightly sprout them? So this is a pretty long question, but the question is basically, is there some kind of scientific reasoning behind why she said bean sprouts aren't allowed? I don't know the actual reason why she said to exclude them. I would say, like, for me, for some of the things that didn't make any sense, I just included them anyways. For example, kefir. I didn't think it made any sense for yogurt to be included and yogurt to be excluded. So after researching it, I decided to replace with kefir because it was something important to me that made the diet a lot more feasible. So if there's something, I would say, like that doesn't make sense to you, and you do a lot of research about whether people on, for example, the AIP eat bean sprouts, or other people who are healing their digestive system might eat bean sprouts. And actually, you know what? I did eat bean sprouts while I was on the Specific Carbohydrate Diet. I didn't know that they weren't legal. I guess I didn't follow it as strictly as I thought. But in pho, because I used to go to pho restaurants and order just the soup without the noodles. So it's just beef broth and beef, and I would put the bean sprouts in it that were on the table. So I didn't exclude bean sprouts. I hope that that's helpful to you. And yeah, I think it's really important to go by how you feel. It's pretty difficult to keep track of all of the individual things, and I feel like as long as you're healing, as long as you're following the fundamentals of the diet strictly and not eating processed foods and sugar, something like a bean sprout, which is obviously like mostly water anyways, and definitely not high in sugar or processed. If you can tolerate it well, my personal feeling is in moderation. Do what seems right to you. Yeah, so I hope this is helpful to you. And in terms of, practical how-tos, I would say that everyone's going to be different. So it's hard for me to say that, like, just do this and this and this. I think that keeping a food journal is going to be the biggest tool if you want to know which foods to include and exclude. And beyond that, educating yourself as much as possible about the specific carbohydrate diet and the mentality behind it and what your body really needs is going to be really helpful to guide your decision-making process. So, yeah. Thank you very much for this comment, because I found those were really great questions, and I hope that this is helpful. Please let me know, all of you, if you have any more questions, and I could also make a Q&A video after a while by collecting different questions that people have asked, so feel free to ask anything that you feel you'd like to know. And you can also share your experiences if you've done the diet or if you've included or excluded different things. The more people contribute, the more, patterns will become noticeable and people will have a better guideline about what to do. So thank you so much for watching. Feel free to check out my other Specific Carbohydrate Diet videos. And if you like this video, please press like. And if you want to see more of my videos, please subscribe. And all the best on your healing journey. Thank you. Bye.